Yeah, that's always going to go out because this is where your water's getting sucked in.
Right.
This mechanical side is the one that goes up against the sleeve. And then you have your ring. And now the trick with this guy is you want to make sure, don't just stick it on there, make sure it's seated correctly, right?
Can I feel it?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
So if you put it on and it's not seated correctly, it'll kind of move, it'll move off that. So you'll feel that it's there.
Click.
Yeah. Be careful with this, particularly on if you're doing a big one.
Okay.
And you have to put this on sideways, on its side.
This is going
on.
yeah,
Right. So if this was laying down, with these little ones, I like to do it up like this, except for the seal part. Okay. And since you had one drop, I'll show you. We'll probably want to do it from the side.
Show me.
But I'll talk about that when we get there. But this way, there's no way it's gonna. But make sure you get all the way down. This is the other problem. Is sometimes you'll have these tight. When you push it on, this one's pretty smooth, but some of them will get on there and you have to almost like handle them, you know. Yeah. And if they're that way, you can't. Sometimes you think it's down, and it's all the way, and it's not. You'll hear an audible thunk like this one here when it's good. You'll hear that. You know it's seating up good. You've got like a 1/4-inch gap all the way around. Okay. Right? You have this gap. Okay. So when you push this all the way down, right? Mm-hmm. It should have a gap all the way around. But if it's sitting between those, then it binds up.
Can we put that seal down?
Mm-hmm.
Can I see it? Okay, so this is sitting in here.
Yep, so you'll see the groove side will go down.
Yeah, the groove side goes into the spring.
Yeah.
So this sits on here this way.
Nope, the other way.
Yep. Yeah, the other way. So it's setting there solid.
Yep. So now it'll stay in there, but you can see if it was sideways,
it would be.
It could easily drop like this,
and usually keep that spacing, like you said.
You know, and this one is being nice, and the minute when we start putting pressure in it, it pushes it back in. But the ones that we have didn't, and when we pulled that out, this thing is smashed.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because it got mashed between when you put it.
But it's still once it shifted, and probably because it got smashed, it was able to dislodge a little easier even.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then it was letting the whole impeller go crazy and made some crazy noises. So now,
I've just gotten in between
this style, now close coupled pump, they're gonna have that, this gasket that goes here, that's more of just a spacer. It's not a sealing gasket. Yeah, your sealing is your O-ring right here. So we'll want to probably grease this up a little bit more because we've lost a lot of the grease on there. But that's the one that actually is keeping the pressure out. Now, the one out here is more just a spacer, so you don't have to make metal to metal to keep the corrosion down, and also to help you break things loose and all that stuff.
Yeah. Is this seal good?
It looks pretty good. You want to check, make sure there's no nicks. Yeah. You know, you can take it off, but the problem with if you take it off, you stretch it out a little bit. It's easy to get back on, but they tend to, like any O-ring, they tend to stretch a little bit, and the bigger they are, the more they stretch.
Just, I think, like soak it up and stuff.
Yeah. So what I'll do, since we have it here, and maybe we'll go take it off just because it looks like it's been washed. If you take it off and
I didn't take it off. I just soaked it with it.
Oh, okay. So we'll put some grease on there.
What kind of grease?
This stuff right here is what I use that they give you with your seal.
Grease.
I recommend getting a tube of it just because I'll show you. I use a lot of that.
I've got a couple more of those.
I used to use Dawn, and you can use Dawn. And Dawn works well but it washes away, and that was the whole intention of it. You don't want, there's certain things you don't want in there because it can get on the shaft sleeve surfaces, and it damages the surface of the seal.
Okay, so you don't.
So you can't use like grease, like actual grease and other things like that.
Soaps you said you could, because I've used soap on.
You can, but I recommend the only one I've had experience with and recommend is Dawn. So Dawn is just it's a neutral, you know, clean, whatever. And the other benefit of that is you can use it on domestic pumps and things like that because it's non-toxic.
Yeah.
So, but otherwise, I would always just use this stuff.
Okay.
Now on the seal, the new seals, most of them come with this little packet.
Yeah, that's what.
So I use this on the actual seal part. If you don't have extra, I keep a tube, so I'm going to lube all this up because you had problems. Okay. So we're going to put a bunch on here. We're probably going to put some in the housing. So we're going to grease this thing up real good. So to make sure we cover everything, so we don't want to leak it anymore. So the problem is, unless we see something obvious, we're probably not going to know 100% what it was if we fix the problem, right? So This guy,
Lifting that plate up.
you can lift that plate up sometimes it won't come out. But since this is new enough, this will probably slide out. And this is what I was saying, sometimes this is on there pretty good.
Yeah, it was before.
And when you pull it up, it will pull this shaft sleeve up. So this shaft sleeve, we have a new one, but we'll take a look at it. But I don't think it needs to be replaced. I'll leave it up to you guys. I think they were going to put that on your bill anyway. If you want, I can leave the seal with you, or we can try to take it off if we end up
Two the same times.
Easy enough. Just need the right pry bar and you went right off the grease there. That's smart.
I didn't get it hopefully. Just noticing it's there. What do you got now? It's just...
So you do. Now you're saying you don't recommend silicone really, even on the inside. You'd put something
on here,
else.
yes.
On here, yes, still silicone, but no.
And so that is the, so you can see.
Yeah.
We have leftover from what was there before.
Yeah.
And we probably put silicone in there. That may have been another weak spot. We want to clean. When we take these off, these need to be
totally clean,
like pristine.
Yeah.
I never reused
and that's, I guess,
right?
the question I've got. Does this had grooves in that once we were done? Little groove marks,
If they're
like
sideways,
little pitted spots.
If it's aggressive, you know, they say they don't want any, you know, on there. But what I tell people, because I've never had any issues with, they don't want side to side because they say that compromises the ability of the sleeve to slide up and down.
Right.
Yeah.
But my experience has been the opposite. We don't want any this way.
Yeah.
Because then it creates a path for a leak, especially if you have glycol. That stuff finds its way through anything, you know, microscopic scratch. You know, this guy here, pretty good. We just need to wipe it off a little bit. Phil, we've already told you. You know what I mean? We'll do what we can to help you, but at some point, you know, you need to start accepting what is, you know.
Let's go.
Some of these, you probably have had experience with them, will sit in there a lot worse than that one.
So what I'll usually do
This isn't the first.
is the prep is the other thing. Prepping all the surfaces is the other big thing, and that's where a lot of people go short. Is they'll just pull it off. They're in a hurry. They'll have it just like this. They'll throw some silicone in there real quick. They'll slap that on there. They'll throw their silicone and put it all together, and some debris or some slime or some cleaner or whatever gets in there and it damages it. So what I'll do is I say, okay, you know what? It is a messy process, but you know, once you get everything apart, clean everything real clean, then clean your hands so you don't have anything that's going to possibly cause problems while you're trying to, and then start putting it together, and then you just do the best you can, keeping things off. There's some things that you can get all day with, and there's other things that you have to be careful with.
Yeah.
So just take some
like,
extra time on
you want
a
to wear
seal.
some of these vinyl gloves like he's wearing, correct? Put this together.
Not necessarily. You can. I usually don't because it messes up my dexterity.
But this is the stuff that I have that I haven't had any problems with chemically wise and somewhat heat tolerant. You know, because that's the other thing. A lot of silicones aren't very heat tolerant. This stuff's good up to about 240 degrees, which you shouldn't be 240 degrees
Anywhere.
So
Unless you're steaming.
So what I'll do, I'll just dump a bunch in here. So now, should be good there. I'm gonna put this guy on.
You're gonna slide the keyway to the same spot.
Yep. And so what I'll do is I'll spin it a few times
to kind of evenly.
So if there
that.
is any gaps in it, it's going to be counter to the water path.
That makes sense.
Right?
Mm-hmm. And then just clean off the
We'll
excess.
pull this little guy out here. And then what I'll sometimes do is, particularly on the inlines,
You'll just
is I'll run around
the top.
And this is, I said, like you'll notice if you pull an inline apart, you'll know what I'm talking about. There'll be a gap here.
Yeah.
So if you think it's the seal or the shaft and you don't want to pull it off or you can't get it off, I'll get a razor blade, and because there'll be residual in there already. I'll get a razor blade and I'll cut it all out, scrape it out with my electric terminal screwdriver, and then I'll put some of this around the top and make like a little chafer on it, you know.
Fill it.
Because it's not in the path of the seal, right? This is just making sure these two aren't going to leak between the two, right? So if this is done wrong, then it doesn't matter how good you do on your seal, it'll just leak. And like I said, if this is, you'll know because on these instructions, and on the inlines it's harder because they don't stick out as far as this one does. But you'll know on inlines or on the instructions, you'll see it because this sticks out like that far, and you can see it spraying out of that.
Yeah.
But on the inline, it's a little harder because it's only sticking out like maybe an 1/8 if that.
Hand off auto buttons.
What are you doing there?
I'm just putting the key in to make sure, because
Gotcha.
the other thing to make sure is that key gets into the brass, because that's what holds that. Because otherwise, if it binds up, that brass will just.
Yep. Just
give it a little tap just to hold it in place.
That's probably a good thing we did that too. Just go down all the way.
Yeah, that looks like it's in there now.
So now you're going to want some on here because your sleeve's going to go up and down. But here's the tricky part. Once I put this into here and this on, I have to put that the shaft sleeve side on. As I push that down, guess what it's going to do? It's going to plow this grease.
Yeah.
So if I put a big cake like that on there, when I push that down, it's going to
plow
come out and it's going to go right on top of my seal. So I do want some on here. So what I'll do is I'll put a fine film over it.
Okay.
So that way, as I'm pushing on the seal, if it does come out the back, there's still a small film that's going to be on. But I don't want enough to get pressed, you know, to get behind the seal.
Right.
So just like that.
Little grooves.
Yeah, and the moisture is not the problem. It's what's in the moisture. And if you have moisture after you pull this out, there's almost guaranteed you're going to have a little micro dust.
So we're going to go say, when he's talking about that color, there's this little shoulder right in here.
That's the part you need to watch, because sometimes you notice how it's kind of farther over here than here.
Yep.
Because this is cast iron, right? It's not precise, right? So when they machine that, they're machining here to get your gaps perfect. They don't care about the rest of this junk. So if that ended up being pretty far one way, then it might have not a collar around the outside. It might have an overhang of cast iron, and that's where you end up cutting your O-ring.
Basically a little
now this
wedge.
This one has a pretty good gap all the way around.
Yeah.
But you do want to make sure too. Be careful when you do this, but run your finger over it. Make sure this edge isn't sharp.
Okay. Because like you said, that'll cut the seal.
This part here, this surface here, right? This part I'm not so concerned about. I just don't want any buildup. Because I want the seal to see it all the way down.
Yeah. When
I push it in there. But this side here, I want that as clean as I possibly can get it. Because that's where your O-ring's going to sit. If there's debris, that's going to be a compromising spot of your seal. But you want to make sure it gets clean. And this, a lot of times too, especially on a condensing water pump, you'll have rusted pitting all around this.
Okay,
I've seen that many times on other pumps, tons of pitting.
At what point do I want to replace this?
If you have pitting or damage
on the ring,
that's going to go from where the outside edge of the O-ring to the front here. So if you're going to have anywhere from the crown of that O-ring, so it'd be basically the middle of this groove out. You need to replace whatever, you know. In this case, you just have to replace this.
On an inline, you're gonna have to replace the whole housing. Because what'll happen is, no matter how many times you put it in there, unless you could try siliconing it, but it's gonna be a Band-Aid. If you have a dent, and like I said, if you have pitting or whatever coming out to there, it's gonna have a path.
Yeah.
So you're putting grease down there where,
and I do try to get it a little bit on the outside edge, just to kind of in case it does touch on the O-ring. The O-ring will be more inclined to slide in than to get cut.
Okay, we got moisture on the shoulder in here. Does that matter?
Not too concerned about that because I'm going to be pressing in. But if there is, you know, I mean, you can wipe that guy.
Okay, the key is do not touch the bearing surface. That's
So,
yeah.
Okay, we've got our spring and ring housing, so you can throw that guy away, right? You can throw those two away. Now it'll come like this. Now, wear face is down on the shaft sleeve side, and here's your other one here. Okay, so now if we flip this over,
That's
see that?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
the one you want to put.
And just for this purpose, be real careful here. Look at the difference.
Yeah, that one looks polished.
So the polishing at the top side.
But my point is, look at the difference between the two.
Yeah, the shine is different.
Right. And the one that has a line on it as well.
They're almost, yeah, but they're almost
Well, that one has, yeah.
almost non-noticeable, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you're really relying on how it's laid out.
Yep.
Just as much.
Correct.
So
Makes sense.
where'd I put my little white?
Right there.
Look at this.
Got it, so,
Sorry, I took that off because that was in the way.
that's right. So let's put this guy over here so I don't get him in trouble.
Light cardboard against the clean surface.
Okay. So now, until this is in there, I'm going to hold that like that all the time. And however you guys can do this dexterity-wise is up to you. But you're going to grease this O-ring up. See, it kind of shifted a little bit there.
Okay, so you're greasing the O-ring so you get a good slide in there without damaging anything, but it's actually not there to help anything seal. Is that correct?
The O-ring's there to help seal.
So the
The
O-ring,
O-ring is there to seal, but the grease does not make the O-ring seal. It's just there
no,
for
but
the
it does.
sliding
It
in.
helps it get in, and it does help adjust for,
Okay.
you know, whatever might happen. You know what I mean? It does cover up inconsistencies.
Gives you some padding.
So if you have some scratches or a nick or a little pit,
Gotcha.
it will kind of fill in that hole and kind of prevent the leaks, or help prevent.
Dry O-ring will catch.
Okay.
Yep.
Where a greased O-ring will slip.
Right.
Okay.
So you won't get the, you know, like damage to the O-ring.
I've
We're
learned
gonna try
the thumb thing. We're gonna try the
this.
screwdrivers. So once it's down there and started,
It may not want to because the lube is going to cause problems. Okay.
nice.
It's usually not that tough. So then I'll flip it over
See.
and then check this edge.
Yeah.
But you can see if that'd be the same concept if I was too liberal on the shaft sleeve. That same thing would
come
happen.
right out. Yeah.
So now we're going to find out how good I did. This one's a little bit harder, and usually it'll stick. So you just lift it right back out. If you have your finger on there and you have a little bit of grease on your fingers. So you can see there's a little bit of a smudge there, but that's not a big deal.
Yeah. It's just gonna
So that
stay.
should-
But don't wipe it. Just leave it.
Yep, leave it.
Okay.
So that spot's in there.
Then you said you're gonna grease the O-ring.
So on this one,
I guess you do it after.
because we've had problems and because most of the grease is gone, usually
We're greasing inside and the outside.
I won't pull this out. I'll usually just put a little bit more grease on the outside edge because that's the part that gets worn or, you know. But in this case, we've got a lot of glycol
Packed in
in
there.
there, and it looks like most of the grease is gone.
You put grease on that already?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
So I just did just the O-ring, but I'm going to put
More on the
some on the outside, and I'll probably just for kicks and giggles,
do it on
I'll
the
put
outside
some on that main surface because it makes life easier. Getting this thing in, the tolerances are very tight, as you noticed when I was trying to pull it out.
Yeah, we've experienced
So anything that helps makes life easier. New batteries on it, that's up life too. So the other thing you need to pay attention over here, you've got your little drip line here,
Yep.
right? And so we have your grease cert, and then if you also notice there's the flush line, so that needs to be lined up
Lined
correctly.
up with the greaser. Yeah.
Now you can mark it with Sharpie,
Yeah.
but
the first time.
generally speaking, this is the bottom. This is the drain to drain out of the bottom of the pump if it leaks, right? If it pools
Yep.
here, it'll leak out to that little port. And you'll notice your grease cert is up here, so that's where you're going to want to have
Top. The
this
top.
little
That.
little
Yeah.
line there. So you don't need to mark it now. It's a little late now, but.
Okay, let me-
If
this
you
is a
want to
little
do it
bit
before,
better
just to make
surface.
sure if you weren't aware of you know, how it all goes together. Now be careful when you're going through here, you don't hit your seal. You can somewhat damage the seal. Now you'll notice it kind of just sits there.
Yep.
So
You kinda
there's
gotta
not like a
spin it.
keyway or like an exact, you know.
So you line it up as best you can to begin with, and
Yep.
then kind of got to adjust it a little bit. Okay.
Then we're gonna get clean again. We're gonna grab this seal. Now, sounds like you were already aware of it. I don't know if you all experienced the same thing, but if you look, see that like lighter gray versus the rubber below it? They used to have like an epoxy, like hard glue to glue this part to that rubber. And I don't know for sure, but my guess is the reason they don't do that anymore. It has like a weird tacky, really nasty, like honey type sealant now. My guess is they did that because you beat up this rubber, and if you have a hard surface on a malleable rubber, right?
It's gonna eat it up.
It might break from that rigid seal.
Okay.
This is the part that's holding and sealing to that shaft. So if I'm beating that up trying to get it on, and it cracks away from that, that hard glue won't recede, and you have a leak. So now it's just that tacky junk. That being said, now you have these keys that hold it aligned. Sounds like you already experienced it. I don't know if you were all here or not.
Need
But
to
was not.
you flip that upside down, there's the possibility that will fall out. Then if you don't, and then you have two options. One, you can pull it back out, try again, or try to get that keyway to be perfect and get it back in there. Now you'll notice we have a limited room in there. If you had a bigger one, it's not so hard. You can see it usually. With the tight space like that, it's almost impossible to see it. So, you can't really, you can try to do it by feel, you're probably not gonna win. Unless you can guarantee when you're dropping this, when you're pushing this down, that it hadn't shifted even more than a 16th of an inch one way or the other. If you haven't, then it'll seat right back on top. As long as it didn't do this number too. But the chances of getting it are not very good.
So you put it on that
So,
side.
so what I'll do is we'll put it on the side. Be careful with your grease cert when you put this on the side. You don't bust the grease at all. Don't put it on the rigid seal.
So there's rubber
No.
on the inside.
Now there is a groove. See that groove there in the rubber? It's okay if you get some in there. It's okay. It doesn't matter. But you ultimately you want grease on this rubber. Now there is a little receipt back to try to prevent from, like I said, if as I push that on there, I don't want it building up grease. That will kind of compensate for the film I put on here. But any more than that film, it'll build up and it'll get out on the seal. So that's the other reason why I put that film on there really light, but I also put it on there is that I don't have to get extremely carried away here. I don't have to worry about it, hopefully, going back on. Now, in this size usually goes on pretty easy. The little teeny guys, like I have ones like this big, nightmare. And the reason being is the bigger the diameter, the more flex in the seal, in that rubber. When you have a little teeny tiny, very little flex on it. There's a pump, it's an inline, but it's semi-remote. It's a CS model. In fact, you got them right there. Those guys right there. Getting the seal on is hang on the butt. So just to forewarn you guys, if you have one of those go,
you know.
It's probably a good idea to have a spare seal if you're diving into one of those.
What?
A spare seal.
Spare seal.
Because I broke these because I had to put so much force on it to get it to go, to start that rubber to flex over. It's such a small diameter, it was so tight that I busted the seal on the back because I put so much stress on it.
It's probably good to have a spare seal, period.
It is. I usually like to try to keep a second one in my car if I'm going anywhere too far away. I've gotten fairly confident with seals that I haven't had too many initial, like failures. Sometimes you go put them back in and they'll fail right off the bat, like you said. And so I want to have a second one. So once you get it over that initial, then the rest of it should just go right on easy.
He had a hard time with it sliding on.
So,
But
did
that
you?
actually went pretty smooth.
And that may be because you didn't have the film on the shaft sleeve to begin with.
Yeah.
It should, with the exception of those midget ones,
Should slide on pretty easy.
they
That
should
sounds
slide
like
on
that too.
not too bad. You might have to tweak it. Now, another note, I probably should have showed you this before I got it all the way in. As you're pushing it in, and this is particularly important with those over there, when you're pushing that on, the leading edge of the rubber is what you're trying to fight. Once it gets over, all of them should just slide on once you get over that initial ledge. To get that initial ledge to go, sometimes you have to push pretty hard. Try to avoid pushing on the metal housing on the outside edge.
Try and push on the rubber itself.
Yes, because the metal housing is what's holding your seal. If you get aggressive and you're pushing on that metal, it can pop away from the rubber and then you broke your seal. It's toast, throw it away. The other problem is if you're pushing on the rubber really aggressively, sometimes you'll see the rubber start bulging out.
Like that was
When it does that, try to equalize and keep those, and push on the bulges, to try to keep it equal. Don't just keep forcing where you're at, because you might kink it like this. And that, when you kink it again, it's just that tacky crap holding the seal on. So even though you might get it in, if you've made a kink, it might now make a leak between the seal and that rubber. So now we got this guy. Again, you hear that click. Make sure it's in there. The other thing to be careful of too is some of these will have an aggressive, and they try to grind them flat. You'll notice you have that other spring, so I'll pull this off.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'll notice.
Does it matter which way that spring is set?
No.
It just matters.
It just matters the ring.
That the ring is in there correctly.
So if you look right here, you notice they've ground the flat to try to make a flat edge.
Yeah.
Sometimes if this spring is, like you notice this one right here is pretty flat on the transition. This one's a little more aggressive. It just kind of depends on where you're at on the spring and what's been happened to the spring, if it's been stretched a little bit. But some of these are a little more aggressive than others. So when you clamp it in there, you'll sometimes see, because of that transition, it might be a little flatter here. You might see the spring, this is extreme, but you might see the extreme be on an angle like that. So what'll end up happening is you'll notice this ring needs to sit when this goes down, that ring needs to get around that shaft sleeve. If it's cockeyed like this, even a little bit, usually they'll push around it because they have that taper on the ring. The other thing I'll do is I'll lube this up.
Oh, the inside of it, okay.
It won't hurt nothing, and it makes life easier. And if you have to pull it back out, this stuff usually stays in somewhat, and so it'll hopefully help the next time it has to come apart.
Which is hopefully 10 years from now.
Yep, but so now we'll get this guy on, but before we push it down too aggressively, as it kind of came up a little bit, I want to grab my bolt. I want to check, make sure there's not too much gunk in there.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to force it in with stuff in the threads. So
I see.
Get all that crap out so it's not fighting you. You want that just to go in. Notice. So I'll just put a line on it. It'll go around the threads on it by itself. And I'll just have that set aside. You got your wrench, a socket. Okay, good. So, just like before, I want to hear the thump. Okay. So there we go. I'm gonna hold that down. Put this guy back in there. If you don't have the Loctite ready, and sometimes you put that on and you're like, or you put the nut somewhere and you don't, or the bolt somewhere and you don't know where it went. Okay, and then you're gonna want these pretty tight, but don't kill them, because remember they have to come back out.
Yeah, that's why I did it snug before, but not so like that's probably pretty good.
So if you can't hold the impeller, if you're going tighter than you can hold the impeller, you're probably going too tight. Some here, just so it doesn't spin on me. And then what I'll do is I'll grab one of these bolts. I'll just do that number. The bigger ones are obviously harder. Hold it. So the other thing to keep in mind, don't ever use the bolts to get this thing lined up. You can line it up like this, but don't use the bolts to pull it in until you know it's in. See how it went into there? Remember how I was fighting right there? That's that lip in there. So once it starts in that lip, you can now use these to pull it in. But if I try to pull it in, it's not in that lip, you're just gonna bind it up, and you'll could even indent the metal and make it worse. Once you try to pull back out and retry, now you got dents, and it makes it worse. And it's a machined, and there's only like thousandths of an inch of tolerance between it. So a little nick makes a big difference for your fighting. So this one I think is going to go in pretty well. See, now it's in all the way. So now I can put the bolts back in. And at this point you could tighten it down with the bolts if it didn't go all the way in.
That would be the first one. That's what the bump.
And I'll change it out. I just use that one just to make sure my holes are aligned. One of these two is usually the one I end up using.
Matter as long as it's back on.
Yeah.